Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Hope you can hear us all right. So this morning we're going to give you a few snippets from our new book, Power Centre, and hopefully we'll inspire you to look at centres. As Richard Casaro mentioned yesterday about the triptychs, it inspired me to find triptychs in all sacred architecture. I would like to sort of inspire you to also find centres and the mystery of these centres in cities, towns, countries, kingdoms, continents even. So the Omphalos or navel has been historically important to all world cultures and religions. It is seen not only as a point on the Earth's surface, but as a link point between the earthly and the heavenly realms. Examples of this can be seen in many of the Omphalos stones found around the world. Now, some of you may have come across these Omphalos stones in your travels, and they were once the focal point of these cultures. And these are some of the Omphalos stones. And the top left stone was taken from the Temple of Marduk, one of the most sacred temples in Babylon. And the top center is a Delphi Omphalos stone, which stands there at the moment. It's a copy. The original one was more like a little meteorite, and it was coated with oils, rather like the Shiva lingas. And these stones represented a connection with the other worlds at these central places, particularly with the goddess. The stone on the top right is the Benben stone, which was seen as the capstone of the pyramids, but there was also these stones that were kept in temples around Egypt that were a focus of sun worship. And we found once on a trail of the Benben stone through Egypt that it ended up at Amarna, or Akhetaten, the main city of Akhenaten. And he built that city in the exact geographical center of Upper and Lower Egypt. So Akhenaten knew the power of creating and building in the center. And at the center of that center was an Omphalos stone. So in the bottom right, we have another Benben stone from Heliopolis in Cairo. Bottom left, a stone excavated from the great sanctuary within the Karnak temple at Luxor, and an Omphalos stone from the temple of Apollo. And right in the corner is a little Omphalos stone, just not only a few yards from here in Glastonbury Abbey, known as the egg stone. And it was found deep in the foundations of Glastonbury Abbey. And it's said to be the Omphalos of Avalon.
So, as Hugh said, we actually travelled to Italy some years ago on a quest to discover these mysterious Etruscans, having read so much about them. We weren't there to look at any Roman sites. We wanted to see what was beneath the Roman buildings, and sure enough, we found some amazing blocks of stone. And of course, as Hugh said, we also found even older blocks of stones beneath the Etruscan cities. Very little is left of their ancient nation. I mean, they were advanced, sophisticated, powerful nation once, and the Romans just destroyed them when they started to come to power. Having said that, there are still traces of their cities around, and this is another part of the research that we've been doing to uncover their culture. And while we were doing that, we found out about their cosmological way of setting out their kingdom as well as their cities. And as you can see here, they actually divided their kingdom into 12 sectors. And this was a way to find their centers. So what the geomancers did was that they went to, they used sort of feng shui principles almost to find this center. And at the center is Lake Bolsena. And Lake Bolsena is a magical, magical lake. And next to it is their shrine, or once was their shrine to their goddess, Uni. So the Etruscan Empire, as I say, was very advanced, and they influenced the Romans hugely, who took a lot of their ancient culture with them, and including their engineers and geomancers. And they were key to helping them build their own Roman Empire. So the Etruscans used this cosmological principle when creating their kingdom, whereby they partitioned their lands into 12 to mirror the divisions of the heavens. And this, some believe, was based on Plato's ideal cosmological state, whereby each sector established its own society, and within that society they were ruled by one of the astrological signs, and they had their own regional centre and their own prince or ruler, with the high king at the centre. So we have found that actually almost all the genuine centres within our own British landscape have some history, myth, or physical evidence associated with these cosmological principles, which we'll be showing you, as well as the worship of the goddess, the divine feminine. So Brig or Brigantia was one of the earliest mother goddesses of the Britons. She was like the Uni of the Etruscans. And she's also known in some areas as Bride. You might know her as that. She is shown here on this altar stone, which was found on the borders, actually, of England and Scotland. And she's symbolic. Everything about this carving is symbolic of a sacred centre. At her feet is what appears to be an Omphalos stone, similar to the stones we've just been showing you. And in her left hand, she holds a stone ball, which could be seen as a cosmic egg, like we were talking about earlier. And her spear represents what many call the axis mundi, which is like the world tree. It represents like a central pole that links the underworld with the earthly plane and the heavens.
During the height of Etruscan power, from 700 to 400 BC, Vulci was the largest city constructed by them. Here the city is quartered by a central crossroads, with streets directed to the 4 cardinal points, ending with a sacred temple. Sadly, very little is left of this great empire, as their cities were completely destroyed by the Romans, and only fragments of their cities remain in their walls and tombs. Interestingly, as you can see, this landscape plateau, which the city was built on, is shaped like a dragon. And at the heart of the dragon is the central crossroads. So we've also found in our journeys throughout Italy and the Etruscan sites that there is a connection with the dragon force as well. So they were people who worked with the land and the goddess as well, because they were very much goddess worshippers and not a patriarchal society. And they honoured more the sort of finer things in life, and sport and art and the sciences, rather than war and conquering as the Romans did. The surveyors or geomancers of the Etruscans were called augurs. They, like the Chinese geomancers, created a divine template aligned to the stars so that the city was balanced and harmonious. The augur wore a conical hat and held a rod, just as today's bishops wear a mitre and a crook. These were the instruments to help him survey the land, to determine the position of the stars and planets, in conjunction with the landscape topography. The exact position of the centre of the city was often determined by divination. For instance, looking for portents in nature, perhaps the unusual behaviour of an animal or lightning bolts. Once the point was found, called a mundus, the augur would stand on this spot at night, locate the pole star. He would then strike a line on the ground in its direction to create a north-south axis. And this was the sort of key component of the sacred city, finding that north line. And you'll see in many cities, ancient cities, there is still this pole star north high street, if you like. And it's like the basis of the high street, connected to the cosmos. The pole star was a point in the heavens well, it was seen as a gateway, because it's the only point in the heavens that never moves. All the other stars move around it. So if you orientate your city, its main street, to that gateway, then you're bringing some of the principles of the cosmos into your city. At the center, when the augur found the center, he would dig a well or a pit, and into that pit, offerings were dropped to empower the site. And also, the people who were newcomers into the city, would also bring soil from their native lands so that they had a connection with their new homeland. So it's very interesting how they formulated their sacred cities. The Celts derived the concept of division into four around a central fifth from the traditions of ancient India, where cities were quartered into specific sectors. Priests being in the north, serfs in the west, warriors in the east, and farmers in the south, with the god-kings at the center. The Irish copied this concept and included the four elements and the four seasons as battle, winter, earth, north, learning, autumn, water in the west, air, spring air, prosperity in the east, music, summer, fire in the south. These divisions became the four provinces of Ulster, Connaught, Munster, and Leinster.
So evidence of this division, with four sectors around a central fifth, and where you'd find a shrine, can be found in cities dating back as far as 2500 BC. And like this ancient Harappan city called Mohenjo-Daro in the province of Sindh in Pakistan, it was probably one of the largest settlements of the Indus Valley culture and one of the world's perhaps earliest major cities, contemporary with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Another example is the 8th century city of Baghdad, founded by the Caliph al-Mansur, who also used the same cosmological principles when creating his great capital of the Islamic world. Mansur wanted Baghdad to be the perfect city, and to that end, he brought in thousands of architects, engineers, surveyors, carpenters, and laborers to build this great empire and this very special city. He even consulted astrologers, and according to their advice, laid the first ceremonial brick in 762. Braga, built in 290 BC on the Iberian Peninsula, is probably one of the oldest of the Celtic cities. And here too we see a central crossroads marked by a shrine. Count Henry, the ruler of Portugal at the time of its building, actually built a shrine at the center and where he was buried after his death.
We have a fine example of city cosmology in Britain. Anybody recognize this place? The founders of early Bristol used the quartering principle with the central crossroads and roads leading north, south, east, and west to city gates. But it has no Roman foundations, but rather associated with the early Celtic Britons. So was Bristol another city divined by the Celts like Braga? In Saxon times, it was known as Brigstow, which is another term for bride, the goddess of the land, having grown up around a fording of the River Avon. According to the Bristol legends, Brennus first founded and built this wonderful worshipful town of Bristow and set it upon a little hill, that is to say, between St. Nicholas Gate, St. John's Gate, St. Leonard's Gate, and Newgate. Brennus was one of two brothers, the other called Belinus, who shared the kingship of Britain in the 4th century BC. Their statues are still in Bristol, set into the town's north gate.
So this map shows you this little tiny town in the Cotswolds. I don't know if anybody knows Cricklade. Wow, okay. You'd be interested to hear about its really ancient history.
We'll do a bus trip there.
So regardless of the fact that today it's a very small town, it is by the fording of the River Thames. And as you can see from this map, it does have a central crossroads, which once actually, these roads once led to 4 city gates. And traces of the medieval walls that once surrounded this small town still can be seen in earthworks around the area. But it does have an intriguing history. In Roman times, the Ermine Street came through here, and even St. Augustine came here to Cricklade to convert all of the Saxon tribes of the area. So he must have thought that it was an important place. But its history actually goes back even further than that. And according to the 15th century English historian and antiquarian John Rouse, Cricklade was founded way before the time of the Romans by a group of Greek philosophers who built a college here. Now, according to him, he was accompanied by the Trojan warrior Brutus, which of course is talked about by Geoffrey Monmouth. And he came here in about 1185 BC after the fall of Troy. It might well be possible also that the town was situated on a much older crossroads of older roads than Roman. And Rouse also tells us that the Greek philosophers at Cricklade became unhappy eventually with this site. And so they decided to move their college, their very powerful place of learning, upriver to a place where the River Thames meets another river called the Cherwell. And this place is Oxford, a geomantically perfect site on an elevated piece of land encompassed by rivers to its east, west, and south. And the ancient Chinese would say that it adheres to perfect feng shui because this auspicious situation is enhanced by the surrounding meadows with an amphitheatre of hills, which for them would mean that it was protected by any detrimental forces.
So here's an interesting picture showing the sort of quarters of Oxford. And Oxford is another city with this north, south, east, west streets leading to city gates like Braga and all the early Celtic cities. From a centre known as Carfax, meaning 4 quarters. Rouse stated that Oxford was founded as a major settlement as far back as 1009 BC. The mythical king called Menfric was supposed to have built it, and it became known as Caer Menfric. Geoffrey Monmouth wrote that this king was the great-grandson of Brutus and chose this enchanted site to build his town around a college founded by Greek philosophers. By the way, they say that Cricklade means Greek laid, laid by the Greeks. But I just thought I'd add that in. But these are all legends, but there's something to both these sites. Cricklade and Thames are both, if you understand feng shui and positioning of the land, as the geometers of the Chinese and the Etruscans did, they are perfect, geometrically perfect places. So there may be some truth in it. But Alfred Watkins also discovered, with his concept of ley lines, that the churches in Oxford all conform to a north-south, east-west axis that may be older than the north-south, east-west streets. They may be the original, if you like, the Cardo, the north-south line, and the Decumanus, the east-west line of the Etruscans. Probably copied by the Romans or an earlier culture, who knows? St. Martin's Church today stands at the Omphalos of Oxford, at the Carfax, and its 11th century tower today symbolises its axis mundi. This is also where water was brought into the city, and so people would go and collect the water from the centre of the town.
So, as we've talked about, it's always very important for the ancients as to exactly what they place at the centre, whether it be a stone or a shrine or a fountain. Well, unfortunately, Bristol has lost that ancient shrine that they once had at their centre, which was an ancient high cross, which stood just where these Norwich Union and Bank of England buildings stand today. These are empty now. They're derelict, they're vandalized, and behind it is a bombed-out Saxon church, really early Saxon church dedicated to St. Mary Le Porte. Now, these commercial buildings are completely out of keeping with the historic layout of that central part of Bristol. And they also seem to be disconnected from the rest of that area also. Now, the old geometers would have seen these buildings as most unfitting as a symbol to have at a city's sacred Omphalos. And in fact, you could almost say that this sacred significance and power of the centre of Bristol has been completely usurped by capitalism and self-interest. Now, another example of this is in the medieval city of a place called New Brandenburg in northwest Germany, which was founded in the 10th century. This city is also divided into 4 districts with 4 city gates, and it once had a city wall. But like Bristol, its old medieval centre has been usurped by a modern complex of commercial buildings, totally out of keeping with the early architecture that surrounds it, even today. And we have seen that where some towns and cities have adhered to the original quartering around a central crossroads with a sacred shrine, that if that isn't adhered to, the town won't prosper. And the change of structure not only affects the fortunes of a place, but it also affects the psyche of the people. Now, interestingly, many years ago, we came across a situation like this in a small town in Croatia where we were staying. And of course, we've always been interested in this concept, and we were talking to the locals there. And they said, well, that's interesting, because when we walked around the town, we felt there was a sense of disconnection. And they said, well, this is what we feel. And we feel that one side of the town doesn't communicate with the other. Well, it turns out, when we looked at it, the town more closely, that a huge, great civic building had been built right across the city centre, replacing an old fountain, and even split up the old crossroads. So we believe it may have been the result of a town's authorities not understanding this old concept at all. And what it did, it divided completely the town and took away its harmonious balance. And some who might know of the Fountain Group, founded by Colin Bloy in 1981, might know of how they worked with towns and cities in Britain, trying to heal communities that were in discourse, had a high crime rate, and so on. So they, having done a lot of research, Colin Bloy realized that just the sheer pouring of love and positive thought into a place raised its vibration. So they went into places where this discord was apparent, found the Omphalos, and with a group of people just prayed or sang, but generally just put their positive, healing, loving thoughts into a place. And believe you me, it really made a difference, and it actually reduced crime rates in some places.
The Celtic land of Ireland has many examples of honouring the Omphalos. The ancient centre of Ireland is marked by a natural Omphalos stone on the hill of Ushni, known as the Stone of Divisions. Some of you may have visited this site. Today it's unfortunately restricted, and you have to go on a guided tour, but in years gone by you could just wander across the fields and visit the Umbilicus Hibernia, meaning the navel of Ireland. It's also called the Rock of Divisions, of sovereignty, because it is said that the stone is formed of 5 sections, each symbolically representing the 5 provinces: Leinster, Munster, Connaught, Ulster, and Meath, the middle province. Like the Greeks and the Etruscans, they placed their shrine here to their mother goddess, Eru, who lies buried, supposedly, beneath the stone. The hill of Ushni has a legend that all the rivers of Ireland were born from the hill in ancient times, where fires were lit at Beltane and festivals were held to the harvest god Lugh. It was also the abode of the sun god Dagda, who fathered 3 daughters here, all called Brigid. In legend, as each invading race came to Ireland's shores, they made straight for the hill of Uisne to claim sovereignty of Ireland. So the Omphalos for them, the Celts, were very important. To control the Omphalos, you control the world. You control the spindle, the navel, the axis mundi, you control all the people and influence your agenda. Thus, Uisne and around this stone, it became a national place of assembly and inauguration site of all the high kings of Ireland from ancient times, until the Christian times, when it was changed, as we'll discuss in a minute. Even during the Irish War of Independence in the early 20th century, a flag was inserted in the top of the stone around which political meetings were held. So it still holds important, the Omphalos, even in the 20th century. Ireland was quartered into 4 separate kingdoms: Connaught, Ulster, Leinster, Munster, around a central fifth called Meath. Each kingdom was ruled by a king subservient to the High King at Uisne. Each kingdom had their own royal sanctuaries and goddess shrines adapted from much earlier prehistoric complexes.
Remarkably, most of these old royal centres still survive, and some can be visited, including Rathcrogan, which is in West Ireland, in the west part of Ireland, in the old province of Connaught, and it was the capital of the Celtic kings, the O'Connors, and in folklore it was the royal palace of Maeve, their goddess. But even today it's still surrounded by actually over 240 monuments, and it's quite a remarkable place to visit. And in the east is the old royal centre called Dunallin, and this was the inauguration place and assembly place of the kings of Leinster, where they worshipped their goddess Allin. The site is huge and is probably one of the largest of the ceremonial earthen enclosures. But unfortunately, Ireland is becoming very difficult as far as visiting some of these ancient sites. The farmers are cutting down on access, and this one is one of them, and you have to seek permission from the farmer to actually go here.
Very few people visit this site as such, and it is the largest of the great enclosures, the places of assembly in Ireland. But you know, there's a chance, we've heard, that they'll be opening the site up within the next couple of years for visitors. And if that is so, I mean, people go to Tara, Newgrange. This site is just as interesting and just as magnificent.
So this is Emmemacha, which is in Northern Ireland, and this was once part of the Ulster kingdom. And it was here that, again, these kings were inaugurated. They also worshipped their goddess Macha here. But all that's left of it today is this mound, which you can still visit. It's still very, the power of this place is still there. An essence of that history you can still feel. And in the very south is the 4th royal palace, and this is of the Munster kings. And this is a place called Loch Gur, again, very enigmatic, beautiful, beautiful place, very magical. And here, the Munster kings would gather on the hill that once used to be in the centre of the lake, called Knockadune. It no longer is. You can actually walk on it today from the mainland, from the area around it. But this is where the kings would communicate with their goddess Ain, and she apparently would come out of the lake to greet them, and they had to honour her and revere her to ensure fertility and prosperity for their kingdom.
This is all allegorical of the power in the land, the natural power, seen as the force of a goddess. But it is actually, anybody who's sensitive can feel the power in these places. And the reason why we're talking about these 4 places, because you know we love lines, having written The Spine of Albion and followed many. These 4 royal sites line up perfectly and cross not very far from the Stone of Divisions. Ushni is in the area that was once called Killary, or Kildare. This halo spot is also bisected by a pole star meridian, which is the longest line that can be struck north-south through Ireland. And it starts from the very top at Malin Head and down to Ardmore, passing through the centre at Kildare, and the Gwyn Anna Violet monument, which is one of the greatest natural amphitheatres, actually man-made amphitheatres of Ireland. And they're all associated with the Dagda. And so this north-south meridian is a Dagda line, we called it. And Dagda's associated with Father Time. So it seemed perfect. So this particular spot in the middle, what is there? So we had a look on Google Earth and visited the site where these three great lines cross. And it's full of earthworks, so from the air you can see masses of earthworks. And when we researched the history, we discovered that it was the site of what they called a city at the time, and it was marked on the map by Ptolemy, and it was called Laberus. And we think it was the site of Brigid's monastery, because it was said to have been built exactly in the field where these three lines cross. So at the very center of all the three great inauguration sites is, at the Omphalos, is the goddess Brigid again, which we thought interesting. We'd found Brigid or Bride or St. Brigid connected to lots of Omphalos sites around the UK. And so we felt we were on a trail. Right at the very centre, just off in the field, is this St. Brigid's Well. And it's set within trees near the old crossroads, which now just has an inn. But it used to be the centre, the crossroads of a great town that Ptolemy is marked on his map. Ironically, the catchment area of the water from the well is heart-shaped. So symbolically, at the heart of Ireland is a heart-shaped well dedicated to Brigid. And also there was an early chapel nearby. Now this is interesting because today, if you calculate the Omphalos of Ireland, you come to one particular area, and nearly all researchers have said the same thing. The centre of Ireland today, the Omphalos, the navel, is very, very close, or in the area of Clonmacnoise, the great monastic centre. So we think, although Ushni is said to be the geographical centre, and it does conform to certain lines, geographical lines, its positioning is slightly off. It's about 15, 20 miles from the present centre. So we discovered that coastal changes that took place in the northwest of Ireland that actually changed the Omphalos. And so in the Christian era, the Clonmacnoise was built right at the very centre of Ireland at a crossroads of one of the most ancient routes across the belt of Ireland, called the Ansley Moor, or the Escariada, which is a natural ridge of gravel that was left after the floods, or the melting of the ice. And this was used to sort of navigate the bogs between Dublin and Galway. And today it is probably one of the most forgotten pilgrim routes in the whole of Europe, but we've sort of done our own little bit on it and put a guide to it in our new book. Now, connected with this Omphalos is one character called St. Kieran. St. Kieran of Clonmacnoise is the name he's called by, but originally he was a student of Christianity in the very early times, about 450, and he had a vision when he was on the Isle of Inishmore. That's the islands, the Aran Islands off the coast of Galway. And Inishmore is one of those places of vision. Lots of people there have had incredible dreams, even today. Well, he had a dream that his destiny was to locate the middle of Ireland, from where knowledge would spread far and wide. He eventually arrives at this spot, next to the River Shannon, and builds this religious community next to the Ansley Moor, as mentioned. And he sort of staked the Omphalos, and this is recorded in the Great Cross of Clonmacnoise. with the local king, the king of that sort of province. And together, you can see in the diagram behind me, they placed the new Omphalos of Ireland right in the center of this land next to the river, and they built geomantically this 12-sided walls around Clonmacnoise. And it became the greatest learning center of Christianity in the whole of Europe. And when Ciaran died, his bones were laid to rest right in the very center of that complex. And you can see here a plan of Clonmacnoise with Temple Ciaran at the center. If you visit it today, this temple is almost crumbling and falling over because so much soil has been taken away from it because of the holiness of that soil. But when I visited the site, there is a immeasurable power there that obviously people talk about and feel at the center. And it is certainly an impressive site.
So Scotland, as well as Ireland, also has this cosmological divisioning. Scotland has these 4 provinces around a central fifth as well. So you have Pictland, South Pictland, Dalriada and Strathclyde around this central province called Atholl. Next one. However, at the time of the height of the Picts, they actually divided their nation into 7 provinces, and they call their central province Flotla. And they, like the Irish, had 4 royal centres in different parts of the country. And they all centred, like we found with the royal centres in Ireland, when we lined them together, they crossed in this area called Blair, in their central region. Now, most of the Pictish sites, sadly, in Scotland have been either destroyed or they've been built over, or they've had massive pine plantations planted over them. Some, luckily, there are traces of those 4 key sites that we showed. Castle Fardrig was assumed to be the site of Saint Columba, where he visited the then king, Brigid, to face him and try and convert him to Christianity. And it's said that there was a great sort of magical battle between Columba and the King Bridie's druid at this site. The Pictish stone that you see there, what remains of Rhynie, the Palace of Rhynie, is just one of many fabulous carved Pictish stones that once stood there. Many of them are in a museum now. Forteviet was perhaps one of the largest Pictish kingdoms, and all that is left today, sadly, is this arch, this beautiful carved arch. What was left of Forteviet disappeared in a great flood, and this arch was actually found in the bank of a river after another big flooding about 200 years ago, and it was poking out of the banks. And then we have Dunnad, this great hill down at Kilmartin Glen. I don't know if many of you have visited Kilmartin. A great valley of amazing prehistoric sites, cairns, stone circles, standing stones, and Dunnad stands at the southern end. And this is where the early Picts inaugurated their kings, and of course it was later taken over by the Dalriada. But now the centre of the kingdom of Scotland is marked by this castle. I don't know if anybody knows where this is, but this is Blair Castle. It is owned by the Dukes of Atholl, and they are considered the most powerful aristocratic family in Scotland and still are today. Now, they were Freemasons and masters of both Scottish and English lodges. So that shows you how wide their power went. And they were also kings of the Isle of Man at one time. Now, as we will show you later, the Isle of Man is very significant as a traditional centre of the whole of the British Isles and Ireland. So it's interesting that not only do we find them in the centre of Scotland, but also in the centre of the Isle of Man. Now, in the grounds is the Dukes actually created a cosmological layout in the design of their of the parkland, one of which is this beautiful grove to Diana. Another is this amazing Hercules garden with great statues of these classical gods, and also an earthen mound with this, which is considered to be the tallest tree in Scotland. And it stands there like an axis mundi at the centre of Scotland today, which, you know, is connecting the upper world with the earthly plane and the underworld. But also here we find Bride. In the grounds not far from these monuments we've just shown you is this church, now which we believe was built on a much older sanctuary. This is a church actually to St. Bride. And if you see, there is a cut-marked stone there, and there's also other megaliths in and around the church. Some have been laid as threshold stones. One has been used as a foundation stone. And we think this is evidence of a much older goddess shrine to Bride here at the centre.
So we come to Wales. Wales is also divided into 4 kingdoms around a central fifth. This central province was called Gwythaeonion, which means the place of the monarch of men, or realm of the high king. It's similar to Ushni in a way. It was said to be the last refuge of the high king Vortigern, who angered the Britons for allowing the Saxon invasion of their country after the Romans had left. In the middle of this central province is a town called Llansanfraid Cymdaitha, which means the church of St. Fried in the valley of the 2 rivers. The rivers being the Wye and the Ellen. Fried is Welsh for bride, so like at the centre of Scotland and Ireland, we have a shrine to Bride at the centre of Wales. Is that a coincidence, or is this another example of connecting with the goddess at the centres, just as in Europe? The church is built within a circular enclosure on the site of an ancient nunnery. It also has, on its corbelling, the cornice around the church, carvings of the maiden, mother, and the crone, which is interesting. It's really alluding to the goddess. And inside, there's a magnificent window of St. Bride with flames coming out of her head. Across the River Wye is Rhyadr. And Rhyadr is the great crossroads in central Wales. It's where 4 main roads come together at a very busy junction, and which has a clock tower in the middle, which for us stands like, almost like a symbolic world tree fixed in time. But the streets in Rhyadr are exactly pole star, north, south, east, west. There is little evidence of a firefold division in England, but in Celtic times, we can almost trace it. As we see here in the Saxon periods, the 4 provinces surrounded a central fifth. This middle England, known as Mercia, was the largest of the Saxon kingdoms, and at one time ruled over the others under King Penda, who was a kind of Pendragon in a way, or ruler of all kings of all the states in the country. So he was a Brit Walder, they called it. However, there is a central crossroads of England that existed in Roman times, and it's almost geographically centred to England if you take away Wales and Cornwall and Scotland and use those ancient boundaries of the rivers. And this is a Roman high cross, supposedly marked the centre of England, and many authors allude to it being the real centre. It's situated on the A5 on the highest point of the district, just southwest of Leicester on the border of Warwickshire and Leicestershire. Here the Romans built a fort, Venonis, next to the meeting of Watling Street and Fosse Way. So Watling Street and Fosse Way were 2 of the great Roman roads, which I believe is actually laid over earlier roads, because very close to this monument, that stands at the High Cross was a henge monument, which has been excavated. So all that's left to mark this old centre of England is just a crumbling stone monument that was erected around 1700s. The Stu critic did a drawing of it, as you can see here. And it was shown to be much more grand and ornate. But you can see in Stucker's drawing there's a prehistoric mound to the left in the grounds of an old inn. It's just here. There are, in fact, quite a few places within a few miles of High Cross that could be regarded as the true centre of England, and many people have their own claims for the centre of England. So we thought we'd have a bit of fun and investigate them all, including the Ordnance Survey, the OS Centre, which is a place called Fenny Drayton. Meriden has been put forward by a number of authors, including John Michel, as the most central point furthest from the sea. It also is aligned to certain axes through Britain. On the cross on the green at Meriden, there's a plaque declaring it to be the centre of England. Now, Lichfield was also a supposed centre. Bede mentions Lichfield Cathedral as a spiritual heart of England. One of my favourites is Tamworth, because Tamworth was the royal seat of the Mercian kings, the Middle England kingdom. And Penda had his palace at Tamworth. And Tamworth has the largest man-made mound, one of the largest in Europe. It is a magnificent mound, not quite as big as Salisbury Hill, but it's wider and just as magnificent. We also noticed that along with these centres, there are many battle sites. We found this in Ireland, in Wales, that many of the princes fought battles around Gwythynion, the centre of Wales, before they were defeated, unfortunately. But they felt that being around the influence or taking power from the centre, it would help them in battle. And here in England, at the centre, there was a supposed battle of Boudica, the last stand, against the Romans at Manchester, which is literally half a mile from Fenny Drayton, the Ordnance Survey centre of England. And then literally a field away from this battlefield is the edge of the battlefield of Bosworth Field. Whereas you know that in 1485, there was one of the greatest battles in England, ended the Tudor period, ended the Plantagenet period and began the reign of the Tudors.
But more significantly, we felt, just a few miles from High Cross and these other centres is Croft Hill. Don't know if anybody knows where this is. It's quite an enigmatic hill. It stands on the border of Leicestershire and Warwickshire. It was in its old name, it was called Craybrae, which means Central Hill. And it was once a Druid moot assembly place. In Saxon times, it was another assembly place of the royal Mercian kings. And even in medieval times, there were great assemblies here. But interestingly for us, in the 1960s and 70s, Paul Devereux discovered that it was one of the most important hotspots of UFO activity in the whole of England. And in fact, within a 5-mile radius, there were more UFO sites during those times than anywhere else. So we thought that was really interesting. But like the Hill of Ushni, it was a place of inauguration and ceremony. And the sanctity of the site is apparent in the remains all around there, big bank and ditch at the base of the hill. For us, that meant that it was a ceremonial enclosure rather than built for defence. And although there's no evidence of actual goddess worship anymore, and I'll show you why that is, it is a feminine-shaped hill. So for us, this was synonymous of the sort of swollen belly of the goddess, which of course was revered for as a symbol of procreation and fertility. But this is what you find here today. Most of the hill is gone. It's one of the deepest holes in Europe. This is pink granite that's taken out of here. 2 million tons of it are taken from the hill every year. And it was originally started being quarried by the Romans, who used it to build the Fosse Way. But this pink granite is still so valuable for all sorts of reasons. And for us, it just felt like a great wound in the Mother Earth, and it really sort of, for me, it was a real shock to see. But the future is bright for this central place, this great hole at the centre of England, because we met some locals on one of our visits who was clearing rubbish on top of the hill. And so we helped them, and we got talking to them. And they were telling us that they've got together a whole load of people and petitioned against the quarry taking any more stone from the site, because the quarry company wanted to take the whole hill away. They've stopped it, and it means that the quarry can no longer keep going. So it's going to close in 2 years' time. And we said, well, what's going to happen to this great hole in the ground? And they said, what people don't know is that 10,000 gallons an hour is stopped from coming into this site so that it can be quarried. And it's diverted elsewhere. So, of course, when the quarrying stops and the quarry company leaves, this water would come back naturally and create a great lake, which we felt was a very satisfactory end to this horrible sort of landmark in England.
There are many reasons why we feel Croft Hill is the centre of England, and that they are outlined in the book, but there's too many to go into. One of them is that it's one of the perpetual choirs discovered by John Michell. Now, traditionally, the centre of the UK and Ireland is marked by the Isle of Man, the realm of the ancient god Manannán. Its enchanted lands are full of stories of it being an abode of supernatural beings. The British Isles are considered to be the most haunted and supernatural place in the world, but the Isle of Man seems to be at the epicenter of these paranormal activities. And virtually every square mile of the island lays claim to its own tale of fairies, bogeyns, witches, giants, black dogs, and time slips. This is an island of great power, and at being at the center of the UK, it influences a stronger connection between the upper and lower worlds. Therefore, it is an island of paranormal activity, and those who have actually been to the Isle of Man and studied the folklore and talked to the people, it is a great place to study the paranormal. And that comes through the geology, as we've discovered, and many other factors. Today, the Tynwald mound and the chapel at the west side of the island, the village of St John's, represents the national Omphalos of the island, and according to some people, probably the UK. But although it's not in the centre of the Isle of Man, people still gather here once a year on the 5th of July, the old Midsummer's Day, to watch the Isle of Man Parliament. And it takes place from the church at midday, and they go in procession to the mound, and the Lieutenant Governor of the island sits on the top. He's like the equivalent of the king, and his parliaments and lesser individuals go on the tiers. There's 4 tiers on the mound. But interestingly, it's an east-west avenue, and they've uncovered that during excavations around the site, Bronze Age implements, and there's a Bronze Age mound nearby and a couple of standing stones across the road. So it was actually a ceremonial site in ancient times, long before this mound. Perhaps the mound is an earlier mound that's been shaped. The island's also divided into 4 provinces: north, south, east, and west. The 5th province was probably Morone, which is the only area that is not connected to the sea. It's the most central. And John Michell wrote that the geographical centre of the Isle of Man was the old Tynwald site. And he's almost correct in a way, because it is very close to the centre of the Isle of Man. Although recently they've discovered that there is an older site nearby, but it's still to be excavated. So the old Tynwald site is in the region of Baldwin, close to St Luke's Church, which stands on the site of an ancient stone chapel called Keel Abbin. Now, this site stands next to the north-south Kingory Road. Now, this is an ancient road that's now become the Millennium Way. But it connected the sort of capital of the northern province with the capital of the southern province at Castleton. So it's from Ramsey to Castleton. And this ancient road, we think, probably goes back to the Bronze Age. It was associated with King Orry, who was supposed to be a great king in Viking times. John Michel refers to this road as being a road to the stars, because it's orientated to certain stars that set. However, the island was originally smaller when the far north was a gigantic lake and water meadows with an islet called Brigid, funny enough. This would have made the Omphalos at the crossroads, the present-day crossroads of this ancient north-south route with an ancient east-west route that goes between the capital of the east and the west, Peel and Douglas. So, and where these two ancient tracks meet, literally at the old Omphalos of the island, is called Crosby. Yeah. Oh, it's also bisected by a line that runs from the longest line through the British Isles from a point, Land's End to Duncansby Head. That also goes through that same crossroad. So we felt it was a very special site right in the middle. And that site, we had a look at that Crosby and what's around Crosby. And the first thing we found was the most visited archaeological site on the island, Keel Vrishi. And Vrishi is the Manx word for bride. So again, at the center of the British Isles, we found a connection of honoring bride, a place where they connect with the goddess of the earth. Over centuries, people have arrived here from all over the island to receive its healing properties. It is also mentioned in Victorian times as the most frequently visited sacred place on the island. There are other interesting monuments around this center. And on the other side of the valley is St. Patrick's Chair, which is almost like a Neolithic barrow. But it's orientated to the two central hills, which are like the breasts of the mother. They're like we call them the paps of man. And there's also a church very close to Crosby, dedicated to St. Ruinus, where three of the island's bishops are buried. So it's obviously a very important place, along with a white standing stone called the Lady of Balafria, White Lady of Balafria, which is a phallic stone linked to fertility and a holy well, and also where St. Patrick was supposed to have centered his campaign in this area of Crosby.
But, you know, like we've just seen at Croft Hill, all these sort of ancient legends about, you know, the worship and honouring of a sacred site has been long forgotten by the majority of the local inhabitants. And what we find there today is that the TT race that happens every year, it rules this area, especially one of its main tracks goes right through this central area of Crosby. And everywhere you see the great murals of these bikers on their powerful machines. And it's like the great Celtic warriors sort of on their chariots of old. So it's very much a masculine energy that now pervades the island. So we just wanted to look at Sicily because we came across it, some facts about Sicily when we were thinking about visiting it. And it does have quite a few similarities with the Isle of Man, including the fact that like the Isle of Man, it was taken over by many cultures over the years, going back to the Carthaginians, Greeks, Romans, Moors, Normans, and Spanish in Sicily. And we know with the Isle of Man, they were taken over by the Irish and the Scots and many others.
But more importantly, it lies at the very center of the Mediterranean, the Omphalos of the Mediterranean.
So like the Isle of Man being the center of the British Isles and Ireland, Sicily marks the center of the Mediterranean.
So they even share the same emblem, the triskelion, which is an ancient symbol relating to the triple aspect of the goddess, because the earliest bride cross was a three-armed cross, the triskelion, which comes from the triple spiral of the goddess at Newgrange. And interesting, at the centre of Sicily's emblem is the head of Medusa, supposedly, who's a goddess of Athena who turned into a monster from marrying Poseidon. Interesting, the emblems are spinning in opposite directions. Sicily's is clockwise with the feminine goddess at the centre. The Isle of Man is anti-clockwise with the masculine boots and spurs. So they could be regarded as two different polarities. And at the very centre of Sicily is the hilltop town of Enna, once a centre of pagan magic and occult activities. And some say there still is that sort of activity going on because the Templars meet there once a year and have ceremony. It's also known as the Umbilicus Sicily, the navel of Sicily. It was here that a grove and temple existed to honour the earth goddess Demeter, or Ceres, sister of Zeus. And below is Largo Pergusa, where in mythology Demeter's daughter Persephone is abducted by Hades, the god of the underworld. But after an agreement with Zeus, she was allowed to return to the summer seasons, during the summer seasons, which relates to fertility, of course.
But, like the Isle of Man, this place has also been taken over. But in the case of Sicily, it's Formula One. And now this very busy racetrack surrounds the whole of the island, and all the commercial things that go with racing have completely dominate this central place. And in fact, there's no access to the lake anymore.
So although our inquiry here into these geographical centres may satisfy some of the curious antiquarians, these symbolic centres, founded through ritual ceremony, have a more practical and spiritual value because of the sacred history and emotional energy that has been stored at these sites over thousands of years. As we have seen, many of the old Omphalos sites, revered by our ancient ancestors, have survived and become popular tourist attractions and destinations like the Hill of Ushny in Ireland or the city of Oxford, while others remain neglected and forgotten, consigned to folk memory or destroyed due to the demands of modern life, like Croft Hill.
According to the principles of Chinese Feng Shui, if these centres remain intact and the goddess shrines continue to be honoured and nourished, there's a harmonious balance of energies. The Celts knew this and understood that by enchanting their land in this way, fertility and prosperity would prevail. But if these principles are ignored at these centres and they become neglected or even destroyed, there will be a sort of sickness. That's how it was seen, as sickness and ill fortune would take over the land. And it also undermines the psyche of its inhabitants, keeping them unmotivated and uncaring of their environment. Regardless of this, though, there still remains at these abandoned, neglected, and desecrated centres an essence of their power. And although we were interested to discover the history, myths, and legends of these places, it was also for us a vision quest. And we felt that the consciousness of these once honoured and revered sites still wanted to communicate with us if we opened our hearts to them. The memory of the old kingship rituals and goddess worship still lingers in the landscape at many of these places. The Omphalos sites of Britain and Ireland are still calling out to us to return to them and to use their healing and nurturing power, which is still there if you know how to access it. So by bringing attention to these centre places as sites to honour and care for rather than exploit, we can once more promote fertility, prosperity, and well-being for everybody, as the ancients once did. Thank you.
Thank you.